The spear at Jeffrey Henderson's throat promised death, and worse should he so much as breathe without permission of the Nasat High Council. The technologically advanced insectoids despised humans and Earth, only allowing 6 male diplomats to visit their homeworld as an exercise of dominating the new species. Jeffrey was Earth's last hope to establish a vital alliance against the oncoming Thulak invasion that threatened to devour humanity within a single rotation of Sol. Without aid and protection from the Nasat, every human man, woman and child would soon be liquefied into vats of nutrient slurry to feed the ever-growing Thulak broodmother. But the humans were greeted by only hatred and disgust upon their arrival on Zephyria. Led before the High Council, Jeffrey felt the burning glares from thousands of compound eyes looking down on him and his team. The ruthless Odin, supreme ruler of the Nasat, clicked his mandibles together, the universal sign of impending violence among his kind. "You are not welcome here, smooth skins," Odin chittered. "Your kind are nothing but parasites to be crushed underfoot. Be grateful we even deign to acknowledge your pitiful existence. One wrong move, and I will paint the walls with your entrails." Jeffrey gulped but held his ground. The stakes were too high. All of humanity was depending on him to broker an alliance at any cost. He would do whatever it took to secure Nasat support against the Thulak, even if it meant enduring endless insults and threats. As an uneasy peace was established, and the humans shown to their quarters, Jeffrey couldn't help but notice the horrible inequality rampant in Nasat society. The lower castes lived in absolute squalor, toiling endlessly for the benefit of the elites. Maybe, just maybe, Jeffrey could find sympathetic allies among the downtrodden, but doing so would mean defying Odin and the High Council. Failure would spell doom not just for the diplomats, but for every human soul in the galaxy. Jeffrey walked quietly through the dark alleyways in the lower caste district, hoping to learn more about how the other half lived on Zephyria. Suddenly, he heard the distinct sound of flesh striking flesh, followed by a pained cry. He ran towards the commotion and saw a gang of upper caste thugs viciously beating a group of lower caste Nasat. One of the victims, a young female, was curled up on the ground, her exoskeleton cracked and leaking green blood. Without hesitation, Jeffrey leapt into action. His years of advanced combat training kicked in as he delivered a series of precise strikes to the attackers. They were no match for his speed and skill. Within seconds, the thugs were sprawled unconscious on the ground. Jeffrey knelt beside the injured female. "You're going to be okay," he said softly. "I'm going to get you help." He scooped her up in his arms and raced back to the human delegation's quarters. "Corporal Johnson!" Jeffrey yelled as he burst through the door. "I need you!" The medic took one look at the wounded Nasat and sprang into action. He quickly assessed her injuries and began treatment, his hands a blur as he worked to stabilize her condition. Hours later, the female finally regained consciousness. Where am I?" she asked weakly. "You're safe," Jeffrey assured her. "I'm Jeffrey, one of the human diplomats. What's your name?" "Zara," she replied. I can't believe you saved me. Why would a human help a lowly Nasat like me?" Jeffrey smiled. "Because it was the right thing to do. No one deserves to be treated like that, no matter what caste they're born into." As Zara recovered, she and Jeffrey talked at length. She revealed that she was part of a secret resistance movement, working to overthrow the oppressive rule of the High Council. "The elites hoard all the resources and technology for themselves," Zara explained bitterly. "Meanwhile, the lower castes live in squalor and servitude. We're nothing more than slaves to them." Jeffrey was appalled by the injustice and inequality of Nasat society. He knew he had to do something to help Zara and her people. Over the next few weeks, he began meeting secretly with Zara and other resistance members, using his diplomatic status to gather vital intel and supplies for their cause. But Jeffrey's clandestine activities did not go unnoticed. Odin grew increasingly suspicious of the human delegation, especially that smooth-skinned Jeffrey, who spent so much time snooping around the lower caste district. The High Councillor summoned his most ruthless enforcer, a vicious Nasat named Kaz. I want eyes on the humans at all times, Odin ordered, his mandibles clicking in agitation. Especially Henderson. If he puts one toe out of line, I want to know about it. Kaz nodded, a gleam of malice in his compound eyes. He would enjoy this assignment. The humans were up to something, and he would take great pleasure in exposing their treachery. And when he did, Odin would likely allow him to rip them apart, piece by piece. As Jeffrey continued working with the Resistance, he and Zara uncovered a horrifying truth. They broke into a secure Nasat data center, hacking into classified files. What they found shocked them to the core. The High Council was conducting gruesome experiments on lower caste Nasat, exposing them to all manner of biological agents and weapons. The goal was to develop a devastating bioweapon that could target specific genetic sequences. Such a weapon could annihilate entire Nasat castes. Worse, with some modifications, it could be unleashed on other species across the galaxy. Jeffrey clenched his fists. This explained why the High Council was so resistant to an alliance against the Thulak. They were too busy plotting their own atrocities to care about an external threat. "We have to stop this," Zara said, her voice trembling with rage and disgust. "We can't let them finish this weapon." Jeffrey nodded grimly. "Agreed. And we need to get this information out to the galactic community. The Nasat need to answer for these crimes." They began forming a plan. With the help of a few trusted Resistance fighters, they would infiltrate the secret lab where the bioweapon was being refined. They would steal samples and all the research data before destroying the facility. Lieutenant James Wilson prepped their gear, making sure everyone had the best human weapons and armor. Sergeant David Lee reviewed the infiltration plan, pointing out potential weak points in the lab's security. When the time came, they moved swiftly and silently. Zara led them through winding maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main corridors. They emerged in the heart of the lab, quickly incapacitating the guards and scientists. Jeffrey and Zara rushed to the main computers, downloading all the bioweapon research data. Meanwhile, Corporal Johnson and Private Rodriguez secured samples of the various serums and viral agents. But just as they were finishing up, alarms blared throughout the facility. Kaz burst in with a platoon of heavily armed Nasat soldiers. "I knew you smoothskins were up to something," Kaz snarled. "Drop your weapons or be destroyed." Jeffrey and his team took cover, returning fire with their pulse rifles and plasma grenades. The lab quickly turned into a war zone, with shattering equipment and hissing chemicals filling the air. In the chaos, Lieutenant Wilson took a barbed spear to the gut, going down in a spray of blood. Sergeant Lee dragged him to safety, but they were pinned down. "Leave me," Wilson gasped out. "Complete the mission." Lee shook his head. "I'm not leaving you behind." With a burst of speed, Lee grabbed a bandolier of grenades and charged forward, hurling the explosives at the main support columns. The blasts rocked the lab, sending rubble crashing down. "Go," Lee shouted as he was buried in a pile of metal and stone. "Get out now!" Tears streaming down his face, Jeffrey grabbed the data drives and weapon samples. He, Zara, and the rest of the team raced out of the collapsing lab, dodging blaster fire and falling debris. They didn't stop running until they reached the secret tunnel entrances in the lower caste district. Jeffrey looked at the haggard faces of his team, at the green blood staining Zara's carapace. They had struck a blow against the High Council, but at a terrible cost. Wilson and Lee were gone, along with several Resistance fighters, and now they were fugitives with the full might of the Nasat military hunting them down. Jeffrey took a shuddering breath, then squared his shoulders. They had the evidence of the Nasat's crimes. They had the bioweapon data and samples, and most importantly, they had each other. In the dank tunnels beneath the city, Jeffrey and Zara began to plan their next move. They would expose the High Council's atrocities to the galaxy, and they would find a way to end their tyrannical rule once and for all. For Wilson, for Lee, and for all the Nasat who suffered under the elite's boots, they would fight on. In the shadows of the Nasat underworld, Jeffrey and Zara huddled with the remaining Resistance fighters. Time was running out. Kaz and his forces were closing in, and the High Council's atrocities remained hidden from the populace. "And we have to expose their crimes," Geoffrey said, his voice low but determined. "It's the only way to rally the lower castes to our cause." Zara nodded, her compound eyes glinting in the dim light. "We need to broadcast the evidence of the bioweapon experiments to the entire planet. But how?" Private William Davis stepped forward, his fingers dancing across a holographic keypad. "I can hack into the Nasat's main communication network," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "My linguistic skills and our advanced tech should let me infiltrate the system and prepare the broadcast." Geoffrey clapped him on the shoulder. "Do it, Davis. We're counting on you." As Davis worked feverishly to breach the network's defenses, Geoffrey and Zara pored over the stolen research data, preparing the most damning evidence for the broadcast. The resistance fighters checked their weapons and fortified their hideout, knowing that Kaz would stop at nothing to crush their rebellion. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the tunnels. Kaz and his forces had found them. Pulse rifle fire filled the air as Geoffrey, Zara, and the resistance met the attackers head-on. They fought with desperate fury, knowing that every second bought was another second for Davis to complete his task. In the chaos of battle, a figure slipped away from the fighting. Dr. Michael Thompson, the team's xenobiologist, crept towards the computer where Davis worked. With a sneer, he drew a plasma pistol and aimed it at the private's head. "Step away from the console," Thompson demanded, his voice cold. "The broadcast dies here." Davis froze, his eyes wide with shock. "Doc, what are you doing?" "Ensuring the survival of the fittest," Thompson replied. "Odin and the High Council understand the necessity of sacrifice for the greater good, and now I will be richly rewarded for my loyalty." Thompson reached for the weapon sample, but a strong hand clamped down on his wrist. Corporal Robert Johnson glared at the traitorous doctor, his grip unyielding. "I always knew there was something off about you," Johnson growled. "You're not going anywhere with that sample." The two men grappled, trading blows and struggling for control of the pistol. Davis turned back to the console, his fingers flying across the keys as he fought to send the broadcast. A plasma blast seared the air, and Johnson cried out in pain. Thompson stood over him, the pistol smoking in his hand, but before he could fire again, Johnson surged upward, burying a combat knife in the doctor's chest. Thompson collapsed, his life bleeding out on the cold stone floor. Davis let out a triumphant shout as the broadcast went live, the evidence of the High Council's crimes spreading across every Nasat screen and speaker. But his victory was short-lived as Kaz and his forces finally broke through the hideout's defenses. Outnumbered and outgunned, Geoffrey, Zara, and the survivors were quickly subdued. As they were dragged away in chains, Geoffrey locked eyes with Johnson, who lay critically wounded on the ground. "We did it, Corporal," Geoffrey said softly. "The truth is out there now. No matter what happens to us, the Nasat will never be the same." Johnson nodded weakly, a faint smile on his blood-stained lips. Then the world went black as a stun baton struck Geoffrey's skull. He awoke to find himself kneeling before Odin and the High Council, Zara and the other survivors beside him. The Supreme Ruler's mandibles clicked with rage as he loomed over the prisoners. "So you have sown the seeds of chaos and rebellion," Odin snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "Now you shall reap the consequences of your actions." Geoffrey stood tall before the High Council, even as the spears of the guards pressed against his throat. Beside him, Zara and the other survivors of their ill-fated mission glared defiantly at their captors. Odin loomed over them, his compound eyes glinting with malice. "You have brought chaos and rebellion to our ordered society," Odin snarled, mandibles clicking furiously. "For that, you will pay with your lives. Guards, prepare the prisoners for execution." The guards advanced, their weapons humming with deadly energy. But before they could strike, a thunderous explosion rocked the council chambers. The doors burst open, and a horde of lower caste Nasat poured in, wielding an assortment of stolen weapons and improvised tools. At their head was a grizzled old Nasat, his exoskeleton scarred from a lifetime of hardship and oppression. Zara's eyes widened in recognition. "Father!" she cried out. The elder Nasat nodded grimly, then charged forward, his makeshift spear piercing the nearest guard. Chaos erupted as the rebels clashed with the High Council's forces. Pulse rifle fire filled the air, mingling with the hisses and clicks of Nasat battle cries. Geoffrey and his team sprang into action, seizing weapons from fallen guards and joining the fray. They fought side by side with the rebels, human and Nasat united against a common foe. Odin roared in fury, his powerful limbs sweeping aside rebels like ragdolls. He fixed his gaze on Geoffrey, hatred burning in his eyes. "I will crush you myself, smooth skin," he bellowed, charging forward. But Zara leapt into his path, a stolen pulse rifle clutched in her hands. "You have oppressed my people for too long, tyrant," she hissed. "No more." The rifle bucked in her grip, a searing bolt of plasma streaking towards Odin. The blast caught him square in the head, burning through his exoskeleton and boiling his insides. The supreme ruler of the Nasat collapsed, his reign of terror ended at last. With Odin fallen, the High Council's forces lost heart. Many threw down their weapons and fled, while others fell to the rebels' onslaught. Geoffrey and his team fought their way through the chaos, Zara and her father at their side. "We must reach your ship," Zara's father urged, his voice ragged with exertion. "Kaz will not let this defeat go unanswered. He will rally the loyalists and hunt us down." Geoffrey nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then we fight our way out. For Earth, for the Nasat, and for all those we've lost." They battled through the corridors of the council building, the ranks of the rebels swelling with every step, as more and more lower-caste Nasat joined their cause. The streets of the capital were in chaos, with pitched battles raging between rebels and loyalists. The human ship came into view, a sleek vessel of gleaming metal amidst the organic curves of Nasat architecture. But between them and salvation stood Kaz, a platoon of elite warriors at his back. "Surrender now," Kaz demanded, his voice dripping with venom, "and your deaths will be swift. Resist and you will beg for the release of oblivion." Geoffrey stepped forward, his pulse rifle leveled at Kaz's head. "We'll take our chances, Bugface," he growled. "We're getting off this rock one way or another." The final battle was joined, a desperate struggle on the loading ramp of the human ship. Pulse fire and plasma bolts crisscrossed the air, while Nasat warriors clashed with rebel fighters in brutal close-quarters combat. Private Davis and Corporal Johnson fought like men possessed, their weapons spitting death, even as their wounds bled freely. They held the line, buying precious seconds for their comrades to board the ship. But Kaz would not be denied. He surged forward, his plasma blade humming as it clove through rebel and human alike. His eyes locked on Geoffrey, a cruel smile playing across his mandibles. "You're mine, Smoothskin," Kaz hissed, his blade poised to strike. Geoffrey met his charge head-on, his rifle forgotten as he drew his combat knife. They clashed in a whirlwind of steel and chitin, human strength pitted against Nasat ferocity. Blow after blow they traded, neither giving ground. But Geoffrey was tiring, his injuries taking their toll. Kaz pressed his advantage, his blade slipping past Geoffrey's guard to score a deep gash across his chest. Geoffrey stumbled back, his knife clattering to the deck. Kaz loomed over him, triumph glinting in his compound eyes. "And so it ends," the Nasat warrior gloated, his blade raised for the killing blow. But in that moment, Zara was there, her pulse rifle roaring. A searing bolt took Kaz in the side, burning through his exoskeleton and sending him tumbling to the deck. Geoffrey staggered to his feet, his hand clasped over his wound. "Let's go," he yelled, limping up the ramp. Zara and her father were right behind him, along with the last of the rebels. But Davis and Johnson lay unmoving on the deck, their lives given in defense of their comrades. The ship's engines roared to life, the ramp sealing shut as it lifted off. Pulse fire hammered against the hull, but the vessel's shields held strong. Higher and higher it climbed, leaving the chaos of Zephyria behind. In the ship's cramped confines, Geoffrey and Zara watched through a viewport as the planet receded into the distance. Tears streamed down Zara's face as she thought of all those left behind, of the long and brutal struggle that lay ahead. Geoffrey placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We'll be back," he promised. "Earth will send help. We'll make sure their sacrifices weren't in vain." Zara nodded, her mandibles clicking softly. "And I will lead my people to freedom," she vowed, "no matter how long it takes, no matter the cost." The bond between them, forged in the crucible of war and tempered by shared loss, was unbreakable. They had lost much, but they had also gained something precious, the knowledge that even in the darkest of times, hope and compassion could light the way. And so, as the ship hurtled through the void towards an uncertain future, Geoffrey and Zara clung to each other, drawing strength from their bond. The war was far from over, but together they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. For Earth, for the Nasat, and for the memory of all those who had fallen. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.